Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us for another week of Blumira Briefings, your weekly update of the most important headlines and information for you to know. My name is Zoe Lindsay over at Blumira. I am joined today by two of my peers over there, Nick and Jake. Say hi.
Hey, all.
Hey, everybody.
And a special guest that's joining us this week, we have IT and security educator and president of Lawrence Tech Systems, Tom Lawrence. Hey, Tom.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing great. Really glad that you can jump in today. So we're going to go through some of the stories like we normally do, and we've got a little time saved to chat with you about your journey in IT and in education coming up for folks that are interested. So to kick us off, another week, and I'm sure that if you've been watching for a while, you will be shocked to hear another Cisco CVSS announcement, CVSS 10 announcement, I should say. This one affecting Secure Firewall Management Center. This is a command injection vulnerability that was reported, allowing unauthenticated remote attackers to execute arbitrary shell commands targeting the Radius authentication subsystem. That affects the subsystem through improper handling of user input. It's only possible if the FMC is configured to use Radius auth for a web-based management interface, SSH, or both. So if you're using LDAP or SAML, you will not be affected by this. This one was found internally during security testing by software engineer Brandon Sakai. There is not any known in the wild exploitation currently, but we are seeing a lot of targeting of Cisco networking devices, especially more recently, especially by government-backed attackers. In terms of mitigations, there is a software update released that addresses the vuln. We will share the information on that. If you aren't able to patch immediately, the advised workarounds is to switch to local user accounts, external LDAP, or SAML single sign-on. So to kick us off, gentlemen, I know there's been a number of CVSS 10 vulns just in the last several months. I think that we've been averaging one every couple of weeks. At what point, does a pattern of issues raise the question of whether the vendor continues to be a reliable choice? And does it help that this was caught through internal research rather than discovered through exploitation?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, in my opinion, it does help a little bit that it was discovered internally. We, at least internally by Cisco researchers over there. There was I don't know if there's been a week or an extended amount of time that we haven't gotten FortiGate. I don't want to pick on anyone in particular, but I feel like the vibe I get from FortiGate is they just keep getting popped by these things, and they don't even have it's more like there's so much work that's getting piled on for them. They can't even get through the old stuff that they're getting, and then they don't even have time to do research to figure out the new stuff that they should be looking at. So I'll give props to Cisco a little bit here that they do have a lot of things going on, but it appears at least they're trying to take some steps to see stuff before they're told by external researchers FortiGate is happening going on. And I guarantee as far as what they're trying to do, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to communicate. I don't want to get on their case for being oh, you have all these CVSS 10s, that's a big problem. At least they're being somewhat transparent about it. They're not afraid to be detailed about it. I do like the write-ups that they provide. And I can also guarantee that in terms of this being evidence to move to another vendor or something, and being oh, I'm scared about their next CVSS 10. I guarantee other vendors are in a similar boat, but the spotlight just isn't on them yet. So this is more of a case of the devil you don't know is better than one you don't. I'm always hesitant to just jump boats when CVSS scores or vulns come around, just because that's just the state of the business. And it's by the time you get done migrating to another vendor, that other vendor is going to be in the spotlight, and then you're going to be well, now who do I switch to now that this new vendor's got all these vulns? It's a tough game to play.
And Cisco's a company built by acquisition, and the Talos group does get a lot of free reign just to go poke at everything. So, like you said, hats off to them going, because that team's just going, oh, what'd you guys buy that we can break? What's the new toy you got, and can we poke at it? Oh, look, OWASP top 10 list. We'll just hit that and see unauthenticated input? That sounds fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you alluded to it, Jake. Other vendors are probably in the same boat. It's just not public yet. From like doing some reading, it seems like a lot of Radius implementations are the same vendor to vendor. So it'll be interesting to see if FortiGate, for example, pops up in the CVE or a different one coming down the road.
They just had a one in their FortiSIM, so that just got dropped.
There you
Watchtower
go.
Labs did a good write-up on just how bad it is.
Yep.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there, Jake, that, it's better to know about the problems than discover that they're out there. I think it's also noteworthy that aside from a couple instances of the hard-coded credentials, which kind of by their nature is not really something that you can fix, these have been different issues. We aren't seeing just the same issue popping up across different product lines and only getting addressed as it becomes a problem. So I think that, that's a good consideration there. The other thing that folks may be wondering, is this a question of whether we should be using older auth standards like Radius or trying to migrate over to something newer, more identity focused like SAML, if immediate patching isn't a good workaround? By the way, shout out, always try and shout out, love whenever the advisories include a workaround and recognize the reality that you can't always immediately patch, even if that's what we'd like to do. So a little kudos there for making sure to include that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jake.
In this case, that's almost a secondary question. The first one I would be asking is is this something that you even need publicly exposed? Anytime when I see management anything, and we're talking about public access, it kind of gets me kind of worried a little bit, because it's just a matter of time before someone gets into it, or it's just most of the time it's an unnecessary exposure. I do know that all cases are different, so that might just be a thing that you have to deal with. It just has to be externally exposed. So I get that, but just ask that question: does it need to be externally exposed? If it does, can I lock it down behind IPs? Can I put it behind a VPN? Can I do something else? That's what I would focus on more first, rather than the actual authentication that's going on. Because in this case, it wasn't the fact that they compromised. It wasn't an issue with Radius. It was, from what I could tell, it was more of they managed to get around Radius. So it's how long before they could find a way around SAML, some kind of SAML bypass or SAML SSO bypass. It's more about just locking things down, and it's not necessarily that SAML. In this case, SAML SSO would be the strongest option. But again, if they find a way to get around that, it doesn't matter what strongest option. It's those MFA bypasses. It's it's great to have MFA, but there are cases where we've seen attackers get completely around it just by exploiting a particular vuln, and that seems like that's what was the case here.
Well, the unsanitized inputs is what really stands out to me. Filter your inputs. It obviously would take commands that it shouldn't have. That is the flag of how many more unsanitized inputs are on some of these products. That's probably how a lot of the testing is going. They just start fuzzing and sending everything to there and go, hey, look, it accepted this command and I got root.
Moving on to our next story, we've got a headline about Zoom and Xerox releasing critical security updates, fixing both a priv esc and a remote code execution flaw. The Zoom vulnerability was, again, reported by Zoom's own offensive security team. It affects Windows products before version 6.3.10 and relates to an untrusted search path enabling privilege escalation. Worth noting, this does require the attacker having network access to exploit. So this is not a fully remote attack. On the Xerox side, Horizon 3.8i reported research that there were several vulnerabilities in FreeFlow Core version 8.0.4, stemming from a Java binary XML parsing utility not sanitizing inputs. There are fixes, I believe, released for both of these. For Zoom, update to 6.3.10, FreeFlow update to 8.0.5 or later. We'll share all of those links in the resources. I mostly pulled this one because I know that there are a ton of organizations that are using Zoom and wanted to make sure that they saw this, but it is kind of a convenient time to talk about, since this is a vulnerability that relies on local network access, what are some of the best practices that we can make for preventing network-based attacks on users' endpoints, and in kind of a little bit aligned with this when it's targeting vulnerabilities in org-approved software like Zoom?
I'll do a shameless Blumira plug here. Agent-based detection. Keep an eye on the things that are happening in your environment through agents. Whether it be obviously Blumira has those, CrowdStrike, others as well. So, and again, props to an internal team for coming out with this. Now it's the user's job to act on patching and getting everything updated. So. I would say EDR is definitely a huge aspect in detecting these types of attacks.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here too is like the actual like privilege escalation and the tools that they're using to like do the privilege escalation. Like there's always going to be some kind of like new threat or new technique. But the things that they do afterwards with that access is usually the stuff that I like to focus on, because that's typically the thing, like the behaviors that are just constantly reused. They're going to make another user account. They're going to start to look to move laterally. So there are quite a few detections like focused around like what actually happens after they get privileges on a machine, because those are the things that are constantly reused and constantly can be easily detected on. The other thing I wanted to note here is like principle of least privilege is good to keep in mind here. Like don't allow your local users to have admin privileges. I know that one sounds easier than you think, but like I said, there's a lot of people who are still floating around with like local admin users. Just have separated accounts if you can. And then I also made a note here, like this is kind of probably more for an advanced environment, but maybe having approved tools per role or specific images for specific roles in your company. So like maybe Zoom is an approved tool, but does everybody need it? Are there specific people in your org that work on a machine who would never need access to Zoom, and you could keep it off of those machines and kind of like monitor that kind of access? I mean, I know we're talking about Zoom here just because that's what the point is about, but that's true with any piece of software. Is like, is there a specific image or a specific set of software that is approved that you can separate out by roles in your company, so that way you can have like actual like approved tools per role rather than like everybody just gets every tool?
It's also similar. Principles of least privileges applies to software as well. If they don't need it, don't load it on there. You're reducing threat surface.
Absolutely. Fundamentals still apply. We've got another story talking a little bit later about the perimeterless environment, but we still have ways we can apply those fundamentals even there. Moving on to our most changed trends of the week. Again, we had been running the tops of the week, most common findings as observed on Blumira's platform. These are relatively stable week to week. And so we've started taking a look at the most changed trends to try and get some early indicators of where we may be seeing some movement or some early activity. So in the threats category, we've got a Cisco ASA for excessive auth errors, dumping lsas.exe memory using procdump, RDP connection from a public IP, specifically as reported through Checkpoint. Usually RDP connection from a public IP overall pops up in the most commons. Suspicious OneNote attachment, unmitigated PUA or adware, and CrowdStrike critical alert. Anything stand out to you on the threats category this week?
Yeah, I wanted to provide a quick definition for the PUA, just for those who aren't aware. So that's typically stands for potentially unwanted application. You might also see this as a PUP, PUP, potentially unwanted program. So just as a quick definition there. And then as far as things that I'm seeing that stuck out to me, so we had two like SSL VPN or like some kind of VPN service threats on this list this week. One being in the number one spot with the Cisco ASA excessive authentication failures, and then we had another one that was further down in the 5 spot at the FortiGate SSL VPN. And that one was specifically focused on an actual like pre-auth RCE via an old CVE from 2022. still applicable because sometimes those machines get out there, and they're just, sometimes you just don't have a patching process and you miss that stuff. But yeah, VPN service has been big for like, I mean, the longest time, but also I feel like it's been like a pretty big target for attackers. Like, definitely in the last couple of years. I don't know if it's just they never really seem to go away. They seem to go in cycles, and it's like either a new CVE is released or a new group comes out of nowhere and they're trying the same thing at like stuff that people have already tried, but it's just like a new campaign or something like that. Or they're trying to exploit old vulns. I mean, look at the was it the Sonic Wall vuln that happened, or the Sonic Wall, that like Sonic Wall news that happened the other day, where they were saying like, no, it's not a new one, but it's like that's just a new campaign that they're trying old stuff, and it's like that's a whole other bag of worms or can of worms there. But yeah, what I'm saying is like SSL VPNs are a huge target for attackers, and they're like very attractive for that reason, like just getting access into an internal network.
I think SSL VPNs are one of those where there's smoke, there's fire. If there's one CVE for unsanitized input or one escape out of bounds, there's more. And it's, especially with some of the other larger companies, they've been around for 15 years, 20 years. SSL VPNs are kind of a throwback that I feel like should go away, but there's such a honeypot of things. Kind of going back to FortiGate, so many of their CVEs are all related to their SSL VPN, like one thing after another. And sometimes their patching cycles aren't as thorough, or people don't follow the instructions in the Sonic Wall case of, yeah, if you got popped with this, you probably should roll your credentials. If you don't do that, they don't have to use the exploit anymore. They're just going to log in. So, I mean, the SSL VPNs could go away, and I think all of us would have less to do in the security world.
Funny you should say that, because there's actually some more about that too in a little bit. Moving on to suspects, we've got reg value tampering, restricted admin mode, excessive MSSQL login failures, fine string password discovery activity, password dumper remote thread in LSAS, ransomware activity reported by Microsoft 365, WMI event subscriptions, and potential RDP scanning, rounding out some of the top 10 there. Anything stand out there?
Yeah, just generally and anecdotally, after working with customers over the past 2 to 3 weeks specifically, noticing a lot of questions from customers regarding brute forcing and accounts getting locked out from publicly accessible devices. So yeah, this is trending. I think this is the topic of the quarter, I'll say, is looking at your external threat surface and making sure that the things that are accessible to the internet, which have to be, are locked down as good as well as possible, as well as, you know, complex passwords and all the basic security things. So definitely an uptick in VPN stuff, firewalls, web UIs, anything that is sitting on the internet.
Yeah, and there was a couple that I wanted to shout out too, just because they're a little bit more unique. We don't see them as common. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context on like what we're looking for and why in them. So in the number one spot for suspects, we had the registry value tampering. That was for the restricted admin mode enabled. So we were seeing that we made that detection because we were seeing some threat actors actually enable that. And what that feature does is it makes it so that when you connect to a remote desktop, so you use RDP, and what restrict admin mode does when it's enabled is it uses Kerberos or NT-hash auth instead of using local auth. So with the idea there being like, I'm surprised that Microsoft actually thought about this. I don't know if they like put these notes in afterwards, but they basically, the notes on their release for this was saying that like for compromised machines, you would want to use, or you wouldn't want the password to be cached locally. So they do the restricted admin so that none of that stuff touches the machine and it's all like network based. But the problem is that even if you do enable restricted admin mode, which some threat actors are seen doing, they can capture the hash instead of just looking locally. So, and in some cases, they might prefer that over the local cache, or there might be some other reason they want to do the hash instead. But yeah, that's one reason why we see that like being enabled, is because they want to go for that network auth hash instead of like trying to get something from the local cache. And you can even see there at the number 5 spot, the password dumper remote thread in LSASS. So that would be something that, like, okay, you logged in as admin and they're trying to get the local cache in the LSASS from that like logged in user. And that's something that remote admin mode would avoid. But at the same time, like I said, having it enabled could be a bad thing if they're looking for those hashes or looking to get those hashes. It created an entirely different vector. So we just try to keep an eye out for those, that registry value being tampered with, because it might be an indicator that someone's trying to do something or change something that they shouldn't be. And then the other one that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to shout out was the restricted management. This was the Azure Entra ID Restricted Management Administrative Unit created. So this one's a little bit shorter, but TAs, threat actors, have been seen using this as like a form of sticky persistence, quote unquote, because the restricted management like AU, it basically makes it so that like even some administrative users wouldn't be able to access or change who's in that administrative unit. So basically is like a more locked down version of like a group or like an administrative unit. So even if you're like a user administrator and you're locked out of that group, you wouldn't be able to change who's part of that group. So they use it as a way to like prevent people from coming in and like finding their accounts and then removing them. If you're just a regular user admin and they lock you out from that, then that account is going to stay and they're not going to be able to like remove it basically. So it's just a way that threat actors, they'll spin up an administrative unit that's restricted in a way that prevents just anybody from removing groups and or removing users. They'll add a user to that, and then it kind of gives them a little bit more, like I said, sticky persistence in the environment.
Excellent. Thank you, Jake. And as always, we're going to round out the most changed trends with risks. I feel like we harp on it every week. It's easier to address things when they are risks within the environment than after they are exploited and become threats. You can tell that I recently moved to a rural property and have been dealing with invasive tree of heaven plants, because the metaphor that I've used all year is it's easier to pull weeds than chop down trees. I feel that very viscerally right now. And so there's some good ones showing up in the most changed this week. SharePoint 50 or more file copy events, Google Cloud API key generated, Google Workspace 100 or more deletions in 15 minutes. So again, these are things that don't necessarily represent malicious activity, but are worth paying attention to because they could be early indicators that can help you catch something before it becomes a larger issue. Jake, I know that you picked out the Tor exit nodes and API keys on this one.
Yeah, just a very quick shout out, because I like the Tor exit node detection because it uses one of our threat feeds. So it's more of like a more advanced detection, and then it uses like a threat feed to actually watch for the IP addresses that are being used in your Microsoft 365 environment. And that's like typically a login. So it's looking at events where people are logging in. It logs that IP address, and then it compares that IP address with a threat feed of known Tor exit nodes. So that can be another one where maybe you might find somebody doing something maybe not exactly nefarious, but they're just doing something they shouldn't be, but also it could be nefarious. So it's just one of those red flags, like, hey, take a look at this. It could be something worse that you should kind of get into before it becomes a bigger issue. And then real quick, the other one I wanted to note was the Google Cloud Platform API key. That's one that we would just see if like someone happened to pop an account, get into your GCP instance and just make an API key. That could be a method of persistence that they would be able to use the API key from then on out, or even share that. Maybe they like planted it and then they go and sell that API key or that access on the dark web or some other way. But yeah, that was just another one worth shouting out, like how that can be bad.
Absolutely. I feel like we also are always shouting out, making sure that you've got a system to regularly review and revoke no longer needed non-human identities or keys like API keys. So it's a good reminder for that. Tom, let's pop over and do a little bit of a spotlight, because I love that you were able to hop in today. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I love to start with how people got into the field, because it's almost a misnomer to say a traditional path into IT or security. Like there's common trends, but unsurprisingly, an industry that has to do with like finding backdoors and loopholes doesn't have one standard way that folks get into it. So what got you into IT and then into InfoSec? And I guess, in an industry that can sometimes burn us out, what keeps you in it? What keeps you passionate about it?
That's a lot of questions. Man, going back to my first tech job was in 95. So I'm about 30 years into my career here. And it's just, I liked computers. I loved technology. It was just a passion. And then I discovered people would pay me for it, because I didn't want to work anywhere else. So I got out of high school and literally just went to every computer store in the yellow pages, because, this is the pre-Google era, and just knocked on the door and said, can I work here? And eventually ended up landing a job. I worked sales when they first let me in. They said, what do you know? And well, out of high school, not much other than I like computers. So I worked some sales jobs. Eventually they said, you're not a great salesperson. We're going to put you over at the tech bench. And I was like, that's where I wanted to be anyways. So they just kind of put my career up on moving forward to eventually working for some corporate enterprise places, to leaving there in 2003 and starting my tech company. So now that's 23 years ago now that I started my company. So it's been a while. It turns out I'm better working it for myself than I am for others. So
that's amazing, and happy 30-year anniversary. I can't remember which anniversary that is, but you should definitely get yourself whatever that is for a gift.
Whatever that is for 30. It's crazy to think about it. I asked myself, what do I do if I didn't do this? I was talking to my wife about that. I'm like, it'd be weird because I've had not singular career in tech, because tech is such a broad term, especially now. You're a specialist in one or another. The security stuff has always interested me, mostly on the hacker side, because my first hacker conference was 2002. So I was just at the Hope conference in New York. I just got back from that Monday. I got to meet people that were at the same hacker conference I was 20 years ago, which was also really
That's so cool.
I was like, you were at the Rubicon conference in Michigan in 2002. And he's like, yes, I was. And it became a discussion point. So I was like, this is cool.
That's amazing. And then obviously you've got a very active channel on helping to help folks understand new technology, doing reviews of different technology that IT admins may benefit from, a lot of tutorials and education. I think the most common scenario is that folks are just kind of struggling to keep up with all the hats they have to wear.
Yes.
How did you get interested in and dive into helping other admins and professionals keep up and develop their skill set?
When I got into Linux, I was an early adopter, all into open source, and it was going to they used to call them the install fests, and they used to do them once a month, where we would drag our desktops, because laptops were a thing that only rich people had back then. We drag our desktops over to the meetup, and we would help each other install. Well, I was on the helping side in the beginning, and later I became the helper, because there's this fun sense of discovery. I got the X window working, because that was, after you load your 5 Red Hat floppies, and then discover that the cursor doesn't work unless you do a bunch of magic to figure out how serial mice work. But there's a sense of discovery you have in newness. And I think there's an equal amount, and especially for me, of wanting to teach someone else, like, look what I found, like show and tell. So that kind of evolved into me doing presentations there, to me doing lots of public speaking over the years. And it also sharpens your skills to try to teach someone something or present on any topic. You end up diving deeper into it, and you become better at it, because you don't want to know just what buttons to press and what commands to go forward. You want to know why those commands, because you're afraid someone in the audience might ask. So you end up with this extra deep learning path. And that eventually led to someone saying, can you put this video on you? Can you put this talk on YouTube? And I said, probably. And it was a firewall talk at an open source conference. And turns out a lot more people watched that video than were at the conference. And I was like, there's a thing here. and there's a demand for this type of content. So I just started doing more and more firewall videos and expanding out from there to all the different tutorials I have. Any given moment, there's usually around 1,800 published videos. I published a lot more, but as a new one comes out, like one I'm making today is going to replace one. So there will be no change, just be a new version, because the software is new and there's no reason to keep the old one. So I actually remove hundreds of videos as they age out or get replaced. So I've done several thousand videos, but over the last, since 2017, since I built a studio and said, this is what I'm going to do, is publish videos, I've kind of pruned them over time.
Okay, that's incredible. Being totally daunted with trying to do a comprehensive content review for Blumira coming up. I think the 1 in, 1 out at least rule is a great strategy to work from. And I think you touched on something there that is good for the audience to know. I think that it's really common as you start to move around in your career and learn new things. to feel like, well, I know a little bit about this thing and a little bit about this thing, and I have this other experience outside of tech, but there's so many other folks that know so much more. And it's that combination of being extroverted, being able to help folks understand deep technical concepts, and having that passion for tech yourself, you were really able to build out a niche for yourself. And so I just want to remind folks, like, when we have that feeling of imposter syndrome, remember, it's not this little circle of what you know and a giant circle of everybody else. It's all overlapping Venn diagrams for everyone. And that intersection of the weird bits of information that you know from your very unique career path can be invaluable over the course of your career.
Tom, you pointed out something awesome, and Zoe, you're chatting about it now. You said, you're worried that you're going to be asked a question that you might not know the answer to, so you dig deeper. I think that is a source of anxiety for a lot of people, maybe especially in tech, because you just want to be, well educated, smart, maybe not the smartest in the room, but you don't want to get stumped on those things. So what's some advice you would give to someone who maybe wants to do a talk or a webinar and they're nervous about presenting that information without knowing every little aspect of that thing?
I would say have some humility, like just be willing to say, I don't know, but I will look that up for you. Email me after the conference. I still say that because there's a game people play that want to call you out, or how could you there's the person that sometimes will be in the audience that does that. I got over the fear pretty quick because I'm just willing to say, I don't know. It's something I think a lot of techs should really do. We want to be confident. We want to be right. And we think we don't know, someone will think less of us. And I've tried to break any of my technicians. That's the answer to the customer. If you don't know when you're going to solve the problem, tell them, I'm working on it. I'm going to get you information later. Don't make an empty promise. Just do that because you can accomplish that. You may not know how long it will take to solve this problem. And it applies to your public speaking. I did get a good tip one time, though. We tend to ramble as technical people, and there's the anti-notes. If you're taking notes, it says, don't touch this topic on this slide. There's the bring up these topics. Don't talk about this because, it'll send you in there. Don't address this or avoid those. That was an interesting tip I got where it kind of keeps you on point because you want to go, oh, this also brings up this, which might be a side quest, and side quests are not ideal for keeping your talk on in concise order of the slides. So those are the two tips. But yeah, just be welcome to say, I don't know. I'm learning this too, and people will still absolutely respect that.
Furiously writing that down in my advice when I'm working with new speakers. That's a fantastic, fantastic note. And so, the whole reason this show exists is to try and help folks keep up with the news that's constantly moving as we're trying to keep up with work. As somebody who talks a lot about the news, I've definitely been a fan of your LinkedIn memes about some of the latest vulnerabilities and the more embarrassing ones to come out that we probably should have seen coming down the road. So where do you get your security news, and how do you stay current on what's changing in the industry? Who educates the educator?
So algorithms drive me crazy. They generally optimize for enragement and engagement, not education. I put as much as possible into an RSS reader. Use whatever one. I prefer Fresh RSS, but use whatever one works for you, makes you happy. There's a million of them out there. But then to make it easier, because an RSS reader just reads news feeds from everywhere, I publish all my news feeds. I suggest people, if they're looking for a starting point in the same discipline that I'm in, of a lot of security news and other topics, I give away what is referred to as an OPML file. So RSS feeds ingest the actual RSS feed. OPML is the grouping of all those, like all my news sources. So I always keep that up to date. Anytime I add a news source, I just republish it. It's on my GitHub to make it really easy. I have a short URL. I don't know if you have show notes, you want to throw it in there. It's just lawrence.video/cyber news. But yeah, I encourage people and I always get suggestions from people. It's not static. I am not the source of truth on this. Many times people go, hey, Tom, did you know about this? Nope, but I do now. Let's add that one to the list. I also have all my podcasts in there and things as well. There's a lot of good podcasts out there, which can be fun. The podcasts, I like them a lot because we all need to get away from the keyboard, and it's a good time to go for a walk, whatever exercise you want to participate in, put headphones on, go for a walk, and catch up on the security news. You're getting some exercise, you're away from the keyboard, which will focus you better. And so go for a walk and be enraged at whatever egregious thing is happening in whatever CVS 10 comes out.
I love that. I also love that normally our quick tip that goes into the show notes is something that, short and easy, bite size that folks can do in their environment. I think this week it's going to be like touch grass and don't be afraid to submit a talk. And I kind of love that we're going to get to mix it up that way. But absolutely getting the multimodal learning in there and getting the information however works best for you is going to be really
One
important.
more tip that's helped a lot of people because it helps me. People tend to pause, and like I'm doing that on purpose right now, of when they speak. And this is a thing in podcasts. And those of us that have like minds that are kind of going in 20 directions at once, we can get distracted. I've actually helped several friends. If you slowly ramp it up the speed of the podcast where people talk faster, you'll find yourself having to concentrate on it more and you'll get better retention. That has worked amazing for me. I listen. It also gives it a density thing because now I can listen to more podcasts at once, but speeding up people's talk is definitely one of those things that will elevate your focus because you kind of have to concentrate, but that's the point. And then you'll retain the information better. That has just been something I've started doing and it seems to have worked really well. So
I also am a fan of the 1.5 speed. I do have to do it on headphones because it drives my partner nuts.
yes.
We'll fully walk out of the room if I try and listen to it with them nearby.
That is a side effect.
Right? Exactly. Going into our general news, Microsoft Teams remote code execution vulnerability let attackers read, write, and delete messages. So there was a critical RCE in Teams collaboration software that could allow attackers to read, write, delete messages and data through a heap-based buffer overflow. That has a CVSS score of 7.5. And it does require multiple steps. It's a pretty complex attack that does require user interaction. But Microsoft did release a fix for it as part of its Patch Tuesday updates. So there aren't exploit examples not well known publicly yet. Microsoft has noted in their own advisory that exploits are less likely because this requires complex attack chain. We'll share those advisory details. Mitigation is just to, hopefully as you usually are doing, applying the Patch Tuesday updates. And I think we saw another issue with Zoom earlier in today's episode. Now we're talking about Teams. Tools like Teams have a lot of the same challenges in terms of user-focused attacks as email channels, with the kind of added challenge that those chat and video channels are usually the more primary methods of rapidly communicating, especially like during the workday. So like we always like to do when we look at these headlines and we try and give folks opportunities to have their plans in place, know how they would respond if an incident were to occur. What are some tactics? What are some communication tactics teams can consider to make sure that they have a backup plan when the fastest way to communicate change is the thing that needs to be worked around?
This is my probably weekly reminder now to tabletop things like this. Like actually try and like think about what you're gonna do. This is kind of like a fire evacuation plan. Like you got to know about it, and if you just tell everybody go meet in the parking lot and you do that before the fire happens, it's gonna be pretty successful. It's gonna be even more successful. You can do like fire drills and actually like see people doing it, and then even when you're doing those fire drills, you can kind of understand like maybe there's some gaps, maybe there's some people that aren't being communicated to properly, maybe you didn't communicate the right parking lot. That's the whole reason why you want to do like tabletops for this kind of stuff. Like have that communication, have that discussion between your team, and think about like you don't want to make this tabletop easy for yourself either. You want to make it hard. You want to try and find those gaps. You want to consider like, hey, we've got this tabletop plan where communication Teams goes down. We go into a war room and then all the managers cascade the information down to their people from there. But like, what happens if a manager isn't around? Like, who's the next up to fill that person's spot? So like, try to think about like those gaps and like make the tabletops like harder and harder. Like, try it the first time. Maybe you can do like ease mode for yourself at first, just to get things like get people in the right state of mind. But after that, continuously try to think like, what are some like holes that I might be able to punch in this like tabletop plan? And this, as far as communication stuff goes, this is a very difficult like topic to figure out like how we can all get on the same page, and if there's an incident, or if that thing happens to be down, like so this is something you want to communicate beforehand. And also, it can look incredibly different depending on the size of your org. If your org is 15 people, it's easy enough to get those 15 people in a single room and be like, we'll go into the boardroom and we'll talk about it. But if you're an org of like 500 to 1,000 people, that's a lot more different. And then your whole strategy changes from there. So just that tabletop discussion, think about these things before they happen, and then kind of get a plan going.
I think it's important, just as you're planning, you should have an alternative back channel for communication. We love single sign-on. That gets us all on the same page. But if your single sign-on is what popped, what is that out-of-band communication? It needs to be established ahead of time. Like, all right, we're in single messengers, a go-to for probably all of us here in the security industry, but I'm seeing a lot of pickup in end users using it as well, which is great. So having that pre-set up, like, here's the group chat that's for the company when there's an emergency. We only put the primary people that need to be contacted in there, et cetera, and have that paper documented. The paper part's important because when the systems go down and a notice comes up, I've had people go, we have a DR plan. It's encrypted now with everything else. I've had that. And it's like, yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, that happened in the last company I worked with. We all had everything tucked behind IT glue. And it's like, well, what happens when the auth goes down for IT glue and all your process docs are locked behind that now?
Yeah. Paper copies of some of this is just part of the tabletopping.
I literally just had this thought. It might be a good idea to, as a security practitioner, keep an eye on these types of news articles. For example, Microsoft Teams. If your org is using Microsoft Teams, maybe run a test with your users, a phishing test with Microsoft Teams, and say, hey, this was a test. Here's what could have happened. This is why we're testing it. So that kind of like starts to get people thinking like, maybe I should be a little bit extra careful with links, not just in email, but in things like Teams. So maybe another phishing test for your org if you haven't done one in a while.
Good shout out. And fortunately, as we always say when we're talking about, user education, it does have to be two-pronged. It needs to be, the folks within an organization making sure that their teammates understand what to do, and also the developer making sure to build in safeguards to help mitigate those channels. So we didn't get time to get to another set of Microsoft stories today, but good news is there are updates coming to Teams in the coming months that should be proactive about helping to address some attacks like this in the future and handling of malicious links within Teams. So we love to see developer side planning to mitigate some of these user-focused attacks too. I wanted to make sure we had time to talk about our last story today. This actually was released just before last week's filming. But we wanted time to go through it. Tailscale released their State of Zero Trust report. We aren't possibly going to be able to get through all of the info in here, but it is really interesting. I encourage you, we'll share the link for you to grab it from their site. But some of the kind of top themes, there's a gap in Zero Trust implementation. A little less than a third, 29% of respondents to the survey were using identity-based access as their main model. About half are in hybrid mode between identity and IP-based controls. 90% of folks who are using VPNs are saying that they're having an issue with their current VPN. Little over a third are now using cloud-delivered zero trust networking architecture platforms. Only 10% no VPN issues. Also, something that we've seen a lot, users are bypassing security controls. 83% of users reported having bypassed security controls. I always talk about shadow IT as the credit card problem. If your process is more complicated than entering a credit card number on another service, they're going to go with the easier option. Some notes about identity management. Almost 70% of former employees retained access to systems after leaving. I had a little shiver at that one. and some good notes about productivity versus security. One of the biggest challenges identified by respondents was security versus productivity, finding that balance of strict enough to be effective, permissive enough to still allow the work to happen. So again, we'll share that. Some of the general recommendations: try and move towards identity first access strategy, continue to accelerate your VPN replacement plans if possible, looking for opportunities to consolidate where it makes sense, focusing on user experience. I've been saying we need to change the CIA pyramid into a CIAU square, and make sure that we're considering usability, because a perfect tool that users can't understand isn't really a perfect tool. So I think that one of the common things that we see here is that about half of folks report that they're in kind of this middle ground where they have some identity first access control, some IP based within their local environment. For folks that are in that situation, especially folks that kind of had to fast track their cloud plans in 2020, where for some reason a bunch of folks started working remotely all of a sudden, what are some, incremental improvements? We are always trying to advocate for address the big rocks first, take those little steps forward that incrementally improve your strategy. So what are some of those kind of baby steps for folks that are kind of caught in the middle still to either set themselves up for or start preparing for a kind of full perimeterless security model?
I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me it's just kind of like getting in the right mindset. I feel like, so there are obviously some things that we can tackle first, but I think just getting yourself into the mindset of what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to accomplish. Just looking at the doc right now too, the Zero Trust Maturity Model version 2, there's an outlined, highlighted, big blue box around this statement that says the path to zero trust is an incremental process that may take years to implement. So don't try and rush your way through it. Just try to understand, get its scope. I'm always one for doing gap assessments, understand what things you're exposing. And that's what zero trust is all about, is making sure that you're, it's almost like an assumed compromise kind of framework. You're trying to check somebody's access at every level. So just trying to understand what zero trust is and how it can be applied to your environment. Just setting expectations first before you go jumping in and starting to lock things down and be I did this because zero trust. It's do it because it makes sense for your environment, and then just try and see how zero trust can be applied. And it's zero trust is one of those buzzwords that kind of got taken off by marketing. So there's a lot of just noise around it. And I feel also sometimes it's got this weird vibe of being gate kept almost. It's just read this doc, go through it, kind of get yourself mentally prepared for trying to see how this can be applied to your environment. And just make those small little baby steps. Maybe it's something super small, you change how authentication is done on a certain thing, or you add an extra authentication step. Doesn't mean you need to go out right away and start buying all these big tools to figure out where your gaps are, or closing those gaps with tools. Just understanding where there are, and then I said, the gap assessment, understanding what gaps you have, what lift is required to address those gaps, and some ideas that you have. And sometimes that means a tool, sometimes that means something else, maybe there's an open source tool, maybe you already have the tool and you just haven't implemented it, or there's a feature of a tool that you already have that you can just turn on and it helps you there. So just get an understanding of the scope is always my first thing, is understand what you've got and what you're working with.
Yeah, I think marketing has definitely broke people's brain on that, because zero trust is a process, not a product, but marketing is here to sell you a product. So let's slap the ZTNA logo on that. So it's nice that more and more things, as we move to a single sign-on system, and because this came from Tailscale and I've used it, I'm very familiar with it, I'd like to give them a shout out for the way they do it. They do things with only tying to your identity. Matter of fact, there's been people complain with them, and it's funny to that how they address it. They're sorry, you have to bring your identity provider. Identity is not our problem. So when you set up a Tailscale account. You pick your identity provider, Google, Microsoft, etc., and tie it to it. There is no username and password. And I like the fact that they're not the only company doing this. They're really pushing it towards, hey, this means identity is your VPN perimeter. And the fact that it's an always-on VPN, essentially, that just performs like real-time attestation to make sure this user is tied to this, and then you do granular controls of your assets. It puts you in a really good security posture. It also kind of blinds threat actors to your environment. This was a good discussion I had at the hacking conference I was just at about, NGOs and places that really get hit hard, people attacking their exposed environments because they don't want to spend a lot of time on VPNs. So some of them I learned were doing a lot of zero trust because like it's ground up startup. So how do we do this? And how do we hide the infrastructure we're doing and coordinate? And once people wrap their head around it, that you don't need to have insert name of company we just mentioned, any one of them that offer an SSL VPN, and that you can decentralize it through these apps and it works differently. And people's brains, like they don't get it to, wow, this is actually easier once it clicks in their head. Once they understand how those overlay type VPNs work and how it integrates into zero trust, they're like, okay, now I understand it better. And I think then it becomes a really difficult deployment to, hey, this makes sense. And this is probably an easier way with actually less friction from the users because the VPN is just tied to their identity.
Yeah, less friction is huge. Like that's one of the things I learned on early in my security career and even my MSP career is like user friction's a big deal, and it can mean a lot for your security. If you put a lot of security around something like Google Drive and you make it like somebody's got to go through like 10 different MFA checks to make sure that they are who they say they are just to upload a single file, that user is probably just going to go, I can do the same thing in Dropbox and only have to log in once. And it's like, then they start to think about like, how can I get around the things that you're putting in front of me? So like user friction is just as important as like just putting blockades up there to begin with. So like, think about things, not only how you make them secure, but also easy to use for the users that you're supporting as well. That's a huge like piece of collaboration that I think gets like lost on people. Like you want to be a team with security. You don't want to just be like, an admin forcing things and it's got to be this way because that makes it more secure. It's like if people are giving you feedback that something is hard to use, like take that feedback and think about how can I make it easier and more like people want to use it more rather than just finding ways around it.
About a year ago, my friend took the entire, happens to be the city I'm in. I know the IT director. He did the hard thing. He says 100% every city worker gets a YubiKey. End of story. There's 2 of them. That's the only way you can log in. There's not an option. There's nobody that is an exception to this. Everyone brings their YubiKey. The second YubiKey is in a safe in the police department, which is attached. And if you, for some reason, have forgot your YubiKey, you will not be able to log in, but you will be able to go over to the police department and someone will unlock your computer for you. And so he says that, I was like, how many people have forgot him? I think he did this over a year ago now. He's like, it pretty much doesn't happen. Everyone just has it on their keychain. If you come to work, you drove your car, it's attached to your car. It's here you go. You log in. He goes, it's actually, the users went from, this is going to be the dumbest thing ever to, this is actually easier than the TOTP or the Microsoft Authenticator app and things like that. They've actually said, this is easier. It's lower friction, but also higher security. They actually passed a CISA audit they went through after there. They use some resource to do that. So it's kind of like there is ways to do it. You just got to stop thinking it'll be hard. Just roll it out universally and train your people on it.
Good advice all around there. I will also, in addition to that Zero Trust Maturity Model document from CISA, I will give a shout out to NIST's newer guide on Zero Trust implementation. We talked about it, I think about a month ago now. I really like it because it gives specific examples of environments and how Zero Trust was implemented within them. They use even specific products. Even if you aren't using those exact solutions, it can be helpful to kind of anchor these ideas and move from concepts into what it actually looks like in reality. So we will share that one again. And yeah, just to underscore, like we were saying, Zero Trust, there's some good value there that helps us address the challenges of a hybrid or more cloud forward environment, but it's not a replacement for everything that we've been doing for decades. It's just a extension of a lot of those principles to account for moving to a model that no longer has one strict defined perimeter. So great call outs there. Shout out to Tailscale. Shout out to YubiKey also for just making a fantastic tool that gets around a lot of the difficulties that can crop up in authentication.
It's
Love 'em.
solid. I've had mine for years. You can beat those things up. They're not that expensive, like $30-something. They're the most expensive of the keys. There are cheaper keys out there, but I'm like, for $30, you know how much a ransomware event costs?
Yeah. And they're flexible. I mean, usually you can have a U2F token and have one or two TOTP tokens as well stored on it. So shout out to them. We will get all of the resources and articles talked about today, as well as a link to Tom's feed for news added in the show notes. Jake, Nick, thank you so much for hopping back in. Tom, thank you again for joining us. Where can folks get more of this amazing education that we've been talking about as we've gone through?
I make everything simple. Just lawrencesystems.com. You find links to all my socials, my YouTube channel, my forums that I run, or even if you want to play games with me, I got a link to my Steam. And if you want to contact me, there's a link to my Signal. I just put it all there. Make it easy.
Fantastic. One-stop shop.
One-stop shop.
So until next time, everybody have a great weekend. Enjoy your week. And until we see you again, stay safe out there. Bye-bye.